Hey guys, so I wanted to talk a little bit about scale fluctuations, measurements, taking pictures, things like that. So first off, we track measurements and weight every 2 weeks. There will be a card that pops up on Saturdays that says share my progress, and that's where you can update measurements, weight, pictures. Pictures are every about 4 weeks, and then measurements and weight are every 2 weeks. And that's where you'll find that. You don't have to do it on Saturday though. Pick a day and be consistent with it. So it could be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It doesn't matter. Just go back to that card that shows up on Saturday and upload it there. And I've gotten, quite a few messages from guys just saying, well, I didn't see much change, so I'm not gonna upload my measurements this time, um, or I don't feel like there's been much change, so I'm not going to update my pictures. Or, even some guys are a little bit concerned. They don't like to look at the scale because it messes with their head a little bit, things like that. And I can understand that. So if you are concerned about that, if it does mess with your head too much, you don't have to track weight, measurements, and pictures. That is up to you. But I do encourage you to listen to the rest of this video because I'm going to talk about why I think tracking more often may actually help with that a little bit. So a big thing is that the scale can easily fluctuate by several pounds in just a few hours. And I can easily gain or lose 5 to 7 pounds in 24 hours just by changing how much fluid I'm drinking, how much salt I'm consuming, how many carbs I'm eating, if I'm stressed. But this is not tissue weight. This is fluid fluctuation, or this is just the weight of extra food in your stomach. So for example, if you have a baseline, salt intake, if you suddenly increase your sodium by a lot in a day and you also drink quite a bit of fluid, you're going to retain a lot more water because that's what has to happen. Your body has to store that. The same thing, if you normally consume a certain amount of salt, but you cut your salt a lot, you're probably going to drop a lot of water. The same thing happens with carbohydrates. For every gram of carbohydrate you store, which is called glycogen, you store a certain amount of water with that. That's not a bad thing. That's what has to happen. So if you normally eat so many carbohydrates and then you have a day where you eat a lot more carbohydrates, you're going to look like you've gained a lot of weight on the scale. It's also true just because carbohydrates tend to weigh more. Like if you think of calories, which we don't talk a lot about calories, but 100 calories of an apple versus 100 calories of butter, if you put that in your stomach, an apple it weighs more, but they have the same energy density. So in the long run, it has a similar impact, but in the short term, it can show up as a difference on the scale. So having said that, and that's also why people will lose a lot of weight right away if they go from, a normal diet where they're eating a good amount of carbohydrates and they all of a sudden cut their carbohydrates. Well, that just causes you to dump a lot of water. That doesn't necessarily mean you lost a lot of fat tissue or tissue period. It could just be a lot of fluid. So that's one reason why I recommend actually weighing more often, because you can see these fluctuations and you get a better idea of what your actual average is. So let's say you just weigh, once every 2 weeks. Well, what happens if, 2 weeks ago you weighed yourself and maybe you hadn't been drinking much that day, you've been sleeping really well, stress was low, you had not much salt the previous day. Well, you may weigh in, you may have dropped a lot of water and you may weigh in at a really low weight. But you hadn't seen your weight in a long time. So, it looks like, okay, that's my normal weight. Well, 2 weeks later, you had a really stressful day the day before. You didn't sleep very well. You had a lot of salt, a lot of carbohydrates. Well, that's an extra, water weight on top of your baseline. Before, 2 weeks ago, your weight was below your baseline because you didn't have much fluid in you. Now your weight is above your baseline because you had a lot of fluid in you. So that could show up as 10 pounds difference. And you're going to think you've gained 10 pounds where your weight you may actually have the same amount of fat tissue and muscle tissue on you as you did 2 weeks ago. So this is why I really recommend, even though we only have you weigh every 2 weeks, I actually recommend weighing, 2, 3, 4, 5 every day if you want, weighing yourself that often, because that way you can get an average over time. You can better see the trend of what your weight's actually doing. It may mess with your head a little bit at first, but you can get a better idea of what's happening over time. Now, I will say the scale is not a great indicator um, of how you're doing. Okay, it's only feedback, and it is possible you could be, repartitioning things a little bit. You could be losing fat, gaining a little bit of muscle, although that's going to be very, very rare unless you're advanced. For muscle gain guys, I think the scale is still very important. Your measurements can be going up, so we want to check those often too, because there can be some measurement error. But the more often you do these things, again, the better idea you get of a trend, because you may mess up on your measurements one time, or you may measure a little bit off, or again, you're holding a lot of water. So I'd really encourage you to do the measurements every time, and actually weigh yourself a little more frequently, and maybe keep, a little spreadsheet or something, take an average of what it is, and that'll give you a better idea of the trend. And I can help you with that as well. I mean, in terms of if you feel like you're losing too fast, gaining too fast, something like that. But I'll come out with a video here soon on realistic expectations for fat loss. For you muscle gain guys, I already sent out an article for you on realistic expectations for muscle gain, and that was in the email. I think it's titled Realistic Expectations, but that was only sent to the guys who are in the muscle gain track. So for fat loss, I'll send out a video on realistic expectations, but in general, it's about 1% of your total body weight a week is about the most you can lose without risking muscle loss. Okay. I feel like there's one more thing too. If you are in the fat loss track, one thing that can happen as well that can mask fat loss on the scale is that when you lose weight, when you lose fat out of your fat cell, water can actually fill up that fat cell temporarily. So you may have liberated fat, you may have burned it off, but water could have replaced that, and that can hide any weight loss. So I've seen guys stall for 3, 4, 5 weeks, and then all of a sudden they have, it's called a whoosh effect, where they just, all of a sudden that water drops out of the fat cell, and you actually see what has happened. You actually see that you've actually lost weight. So I never like to change things too soon until we have 3 or 4 weeks of average data over time, so that I can actually make a conclusion. Because again, if that's happened where your fat cells have taken up water and we try to do something drastic to change things, well, we maybe should not have done that because you may have already lost. So again, there's a lot of things that can happen. So again, that's why I recommend measuring often, tracking. It really helps. There's even been research on this. Just people who track their body weight over time tend to do a little bit better. But as of right now in the program, we don't expect body weight change. Okay, we're not into the nutrition habits yet. We'll get into those fairly soon. For now, it's just getting a rough idea of where you're at. That's why we're really measuring things. So it'll be several weeks down the road before we actually expect to see change, but eventually we will. So hang in there, be patient. I hope this was helpful. If you have questions, let me know. Take care.